As of today, April 17, 2026, a number of significant operational developments are being recorded across the entire line of contact, each warranting detailed examination. The most notable events are unfolding simultaneously across several key sectors. On the Pokrovsk axis, systematic pressure continues. On the Sloviansk axis, territorial advances by Russian forces are being confirmed, accompanied by video documentation. On the Crimea axis, changes in the situation are also being recorded. In the Vovchansk area, long-awaited confirmation has finally arrived. Russian forces have established control over the settlement of Vovchansky Khutora. Finally, critically important information is coming in from the Sumy axis, where the nature and scale of combat operations indicate that the Russian northern group of forces has transitioned to active offensive operations. All of the above developments will be examined in sequence and in detail. Sumy axis, the northern group of forces bridgehead. Perhaps the central story of today's review is what is happening in Sumy Oblast. Just a few weeks ago, a substantial portion of analysts and observers broadly shared expectations regarding the upcoming spring-summer campaign. The assumption was that the main intensification of effort would be concentrated on the already established primary axes, Pokrovsk, Kharkiv, and Lyman. The northern group of forces, for all the respect owed to its extended front, was assigned somewhat more limited expectations. This is precisely why what is unfolding in Sumy Oblast carries the character of an operational surprise. In order to preclude any accusations of exaggeration, today's situational analysis will rely exclusively on Ukrainian cartographic resources, specifically data from the Deep State platform, which represents the Ukrainian side of the conflict and has every incentive to understate rather than overstate Russian gains. And yet even these figures paint a striking picture. As of today, Ukrainian sources record the area of the newly formed Russian bridgehead in the Krasnopilya district of Sumy Oblast at approximately 170 square kilometers. American analytical resources cite a somewhat higher figure, around 190 square kilometers. Crucially, this bridgehead came into existence over the course of roughly 1 week of active combat operations, a pace of territorial acquisition consistent with offensive, not positional warfare. This constitutes objective evidence that what is underway in this sector is a full-scale offensive operation, not a series of limited tactical actions. A qualification regarding pace and scale is warranted. The contemporary character of combat, with the ubiquitous employment of loitering munitions and FPV drones, precludes the kind of 20-30 kilometer breakthroughs that characterized wars of an earlier era. Drone warfare objectively slows ground advances, raising the cost of each individual kilometer gained. Against this backdrop, the results achieved by the northern group of forces in the Krasnopilya district are all the more notable. It should also be borne in mind that the northern group of forces is responsible for an enormous frontage encompassing virtually all of Sumy Oblast and a significant portion of Kharkiv Oblast, and that on the specific Krasnopilya axis it is committing a relatively limited contingent of forces, Veliky Lis and the push toward Novodmitrivka. Among the developments recorded over the past 24 hours, particular attention is warranted by the expansion of confirmed Russian control within the woodland area known as Veliky Lis. As recently as the previous day, a substantial portion of this sector was marked by Ukrainian cartographers as a grey zone, denoting Russian assault group penetration without confirmed consolidation. The situation has now changed. Russian presence in the woodland has taken on the character of stable control, with the depth of advance within the forest reaching approximately 2 kilometers over the course of a single day. The significance of this development is determined not only by its immediate tactical result, but by its strategic logic. First, as May approaches and vegetation enters full foliage, woodland areas acquire the quality of terrain that is exceptionally difficult for an adversary to contest. Dislodging consolidated forces from dense forest at that stage becomes an extremely costly proposition. Second, control of the woodland affords Russian forces the ability to mass reserves under cover and to apply increasing pressure on the nearby settlement of Novodmitrivka. Ukrainian units appear to understand this logic and are offering fierce resistance in the area. They are clearly not prepared to yield Novodmitrivka willingly. Nevertheless, having lost dominance in the surrounding forest, holding the settlement will prove extremely difficult. The push toward Taratutyne. Arguably the most significant single event of the past 24 hours on the Sumy axis was the advance of Russian assault units to the outskirts of the village of Taratutyne. According to Ukrainian data, Russian troops covered considerable ground across open terrain, fields and woodland patches, and reached the immediate edges of the settlement. On the deep state map, this area is already designated as a grey zone, which, in accordance with the platform's methodology, signifies the confirmed physical presence of Russian assault groups on that line. The terrain in this area differs substantially from the comparatively flat landscape characteristic of, for instance, Sumy Oblast. Here the ground is markedly hilly, with a pronounced ridge and ravine character. The river and water bodies occupy low-lying areas, flanked on both sides by hills with forested slopes. The village of Taratutyne itself sits on the slope of one such hill. This kind of terrain undeniably complicates offensive action, yet, judging by what is occurring, it does not represent an insurmountable obstacle for the Russian grouping. The advance continues. With the approach to Taratutyne, Russian forces have opened yet another sector, where the depth of penetration into Sumy Oblast reaches approximately 7 kilometers from the state border. The settlement of Stepok. Concurrent with the developments described above, changes have also occurred on a somewhat more northerly portion of the bridgehead, in the area of the village of Stepok. This settlement was likewise previously listed in the Ukrainian map's grey zone, but has now had most of its area reshaded in red, meaning that Ukrainian cartographers were compelled to acknowledge full Russian control over this territory. Such a shift within the Ukrainian cartographic framework is itself instructive. It means the situation here is developing unambiguously enough that even the side with every reason to apply a conservative assessment of Russian gains has been forced to acknowledge the reality on the ground. Operational summary, Sumy axis. Summing up the situation, one must state plainly, on the Krasnopilya sector of Sumy Oblast, the Russian northern group of forces is conducting a full-scale offensive operation whose results, by mid-April, have exceeded the majority of preliminary assessments. A bridgehead of between 170 and 190 square kilometers, depending on the source, has been established within approximately 1 week. The pace of advance is not slowing. Over the past 24 hours alone, a further penetration of roughly 7 kilometers from the borderline has been recorded. The time horizon is critically important. It is only mid-April. What lies ahead is the remainder of April, all of May, the full summer and early autumn, meaning the attacking side retains a substantial operational time resource. Ukrainian command, led by Commander-in-Chief Syrsky, will be compelled in the near term to make decisions regarding the redeployment of additional forces to this axis. Failure to do so risks the fighting reaching the district center of Krasnopilya as soon as May. Sloviansk axis. On the Sloviansk axis, both operational reporting and video documentation of active combat are available today. There is no news from Kostiantynivka for today's review, so the focus shifts to what is unfolding further north. Russian units continue to methodically expand their zone of control, applying pressure on the settlement of Rye-Oleksandrivka from 2 directions simultaneously, from the side of Lipivka and from the side of Kaleniki. Whether Russian forces have already entered and consolidated within the settlement remains unconfirmed at this stage. Nevertheless, reports of mounting pressure on Rye-Oleksandrivka have been coming in for several consecutive days, indicating a systematic pattern of action. Video footage obtained from the Starodubivka area captures the following situation. In the vicinity of Siversk, Russian FPV drones destroy a Ukrainian armored vehicle as it withdraws from positions in close proximity to Starodubivka, at a distance of approximately 5 kilometers from the line of contact. This points to active employment of Russian unmanned strike assets in that area, and in all likelihood accompanies ongoing assault operations in the area of the settlement of Kriva Luka, which Russian units had previously approached closely. On the previous day, 2 segments of the line of contact in the vicinity of Kaleniki were recorded as having shifted to Russian control. Today, additional video from the same area has emerged. A Russian infantry unit carries out an assault, a Russian soldier clears a Ukrainian defensive strongpoint, and an advance of up to 1.5 kilometers in the direction of Rye-Oleksandrivka is documented. The full area marked in red on the map is likewise transitioning to Russian control. A note on the representation of fortified positions in this sector is warranted. A significant portion of Ukrainian defensive strongpoints are marked on the map with yellow lines. In practice, however, the density of defensive positions along the line of contact substantially exceeds what can be shown cartographically. Map updates inevitably lag behind events on the ground. Nonetheless, the overall picture of Russian offensive pressure on the Sloviansk axis is clear. Kharkiv axis, Vovchansk and surrounding areas. On the Kharkiv sector of the front, in the Vovchansk area, long-awaited confirmation has finally arrived for a series of operational changes that had been reported previously, but lacked documentary corroboration. In the area of the settlement of Krasna, Russian forces expanded their zone of control by approximately 1 kilometer in the direction of Bohkova and Chaikivka. Earlier reports of an advance to the south of Krasna are now backed by confirming data. The territory marked on the map is under Russian army control. The settlement of Vovchansky Khutora deserves particular attention. Fighting for this settlement had continued over an extended period, but confirming materials had been absent for several months, despite periodic claims of success. Today the situation has changed. Confirmation has been received that Vovchansky Khutora has been brought under full Russian control. The entirety of the designated territory in this area is now under Russian forces' control. Just before this material was published, information also emerged regarding the capture of the settlement of Zibyn by Russian forces. These reports are still undergoing verification at the time of recording. Should they be confirmed, the corresponding changes will be reflected on the map in tomorrow's review. Additionally, reports are coming in of active combat in the direction of the settlement of Buhaivka, from the side of Verkhan iya Pisarivka. Across the entire perimeter of the Vovchansk sector, an expansion of the Russian zone of control is being observed. On the Liptsy axis, the situation remains fundamentally different. Positional combat has been ongoing here for several months, without meaningful territorial change. Both sides employ FPV drones to strike the opposing side's positions, but the front line itself has remained essentially static. Diplomatic and military political context, Germany's position. Against the backdrop of frontline events, processes in the political diplomatic sphere continue to develop. German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius, speaking at a meeting of the International Contact Group on arms deliveries to Ukraine in Berlin, stated that the so-called Russian-Ukrainian peace negotiations are currently in a state of effective suspension. In his assessment, Russia has never demonstrated genuine willingness to engage substantively in the negotiation process. Pistorius used this framing to justify the continued necessity of military support for Kiev, emphasizing in particular that this commitment must not be allowed to slip from focus amid the escalating tensions in the Strait of Hormuz and across the broader Middle East. The minister also announced a series of concrete German support measures: funding for an additional batch of long-range Ukrainian-manufactured drones, financing of a contract for the delivery of additional launcher systems for the Iris-T air defense complex, and investment of several hundred million euros in the development of deep strike systems. In addition, the two countries have agreed to jointly develop medium and long-range strike unmanned aerial vehicles. It should be recalled that on April 14th, during Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's visit to Berlin, Ukraine and Germany signed 10 cooperation agreements totaling approximately 4 billion euros. Ukrainian Defense Minister Mikhailo Fedorov specified that the package covers 3 primary areas: strengthening of the air defense system, development of deep strike capabilities, and expansion of unmanned aerial vehicle production. The Russian side responded promptly. Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova, at a briefing, characterized Germany as the main sponsor of the war and the militarization of Ukraine, citing the scale of financing disclosed in Berlin. In her assessment, the support provided by Germany to the Ukrainian side is fundamentally destructive in nature. Conclusion: the operational summary for April 17, 2026 presents the following picture. The Russian Northern Group of Forces is conducting a large-scale offensive in the Krasnopilya district of Sumy Oblast. having established a bridgehead of up to 190 square kilometers by various estimates within a single week. On the Sloviansk axis, systematic pressure toward Ry-Oleksandrivka continues with confirmed advances. In the Vovchansk area, the capture of Vovchansky Khutora has been confirmed, and fighting continues for adjacent settlements. On the international diplomatic track, Germany is substantially increasing its military support for Ukraine, contributing to a further escalation of rhetorical tensions between Berlin and Moscow. Stay tuned for further updates. Until next time.